Hello, it's me, Tony Harmer. Yes. See? Well, I've tried. Good morning and welcome back, everyone, here to Adobe Live. Yes, my name is indeed not Tony Harmer. If you're watching the replay and you have no idea what's going on, it's all right. Neither do I. Today, I'm filling in for Tony, but the guest, who is Joe Allam, is certainly staying the same because we do have an amazing session ready for you today. Joe.
Yes.
Where do we start? First of all, would you maybe just like to introduce yourself for those who are joining us for the first time,
Sure.
perhaps?
Yeah. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Allam. I'm a travel photographer. I also have a YouTube channel all about going through my travel photography. Travel has been light over the last couple of years. I think everyone knows why. But things are picking up. And one thing that I have been doing is I've been going back through my back catalogue of images because I'm setting up a print store. I've wanted to do a print store for years. I mean, I've been doing photography for like 16 years or so, and
Wow.
It's been about 4 and a bit years since I last did like a big batch of printing images. Yeah, and I printed it all myself. It was a massive headache. It was just stressful. It was a mess. It's not a fun experience. I don't know about you, but I get kind of a bit nauseous and a bit I get like turbulence sickness when I'm trying to work out paper in printers, especially when you start getting into like double-sided printing and other stuff. You're sort of climbing in and thinking which way does it work and whatever. So printing has always been a stress. And given that I came from a design background as well, I've done a lot of print, and so I've had a lot of stress in my life related to print. So this time, I'm doing things differently, and I've got a whole workflow, and I've got a procedure that I think will help a lot of people. And I'm also doing the printing professionally, so I'm leaving that to the safe hands of the safe inky hands of real professionals.
Yeah,
So,
printers. It's like my personal vendetta against them. They smell fear. That's what I know. Last time I wanted to print something in black and white, the yellow ink was empty and it was refusing to print.
It's honestly, it's a nightmare. I don't think I've ever successfully pressed print and a document has just come out normally. Like, it's just, that's never happened first time, or it's definitely never happened for page 2. It's just a mess. I don't know
Printers.
what it is about printers.
One of the only devices surprisingly bad at the only task they were designed to do.
Yeah.
Right, and with that, we of course are not alone on this stream, otherwise we could just do it in person, because we are joined by the fantastic community of Adobe Live who are watching this, hopefully, on Behance, because if you're not watching this on Behance, then that's great, that's fine, but you're missing out, and I would just try to summon a link below us, hang on. There it is. Right, join us over on Behance, be.net/Adobe Live. Once again, that's be.net/Adobe Live. Join the chat, say hi. If this is your first time, let us know where you're joining us from. And you can join the fine people such as Alexandre, bonjour, and we have Angus and Doris and Emma, salut, we have Gelana, guten Tag, we have Joe, who's that, I don't know, we have Kirsty and Sandrine and some guy called Tim, I don't know who that is, and Sandrine says, printers have been crafted by the devil. Well, I don't think that's true, because even that guy has some character. Anyway, so should we just jump into it?
Yeah.
All right, then let's open over to your screen and see what we have as soon as I add my own camera to it, because I totally didn't forget that. There we are. Okay. Nailed it.
Alrighty. Yeah, so an interesting thing is a lot of the images that I'm launching with my print store, which is coming up very, very soon. I want to say, but I can't give an exact date, but I want to say it's about a week or maybe 2 weeks away. It's been my big summer project, building a whole online store, coding everything every day, every night. It's been a big thing, but I'm very, very happy for it. Anyway, an interesting thing is all of my photos, bar one of them, I think, they've been taken pre-2020, which kind of says to me that that was a time when I should have done these prints, because I obviously had the images that were good and ready to go, and I didn't get around to printing it for a busy schedule, traveling and other stuff. So in some ways, having the time off from travel has really helped sort of get it all into gear and do things right, because it's a big task. But yeah, images such as these, I'm going for like big vantage points of urban views. That's kind of the goal of things.
Nice.
But the image that I wanted to run through today, I'm going to go through how I'd edit this image, and it may turn out different to how I previously have edited it and the one that is going to be on a print. In fact, it may end up superseding and being better than the one that I'm doing as a print. We'll see how the next 90 minutes go. But anyway, this is the print that I'm starting with, and from the get-go, it looks kind of a bit rubbish, right? It's a bit dark, it's a bit blown out here. This image was actually shot on my Fuji X100F, which do I have close access to? I can quickly grab it if I unplug. So that was shot on this little camera, which is a very popular camera amongst my audience on YouTube. I love this little camera to bits. It's been with me in various places. Admittedly, I don't use it as much anymore. I started to go more towards slightly longer focal lengths. So this is a 23mm on APS-C, but it's a fixed lens camera. Very small, but very powerful. It's a great little camera from Fujifilm. And this image was shot on that camera. So it's a kind of straight out camera as it is, a raw file. And we're going to go through and process it. So first things first, we have the image as it is, but I'm going to run it through a plugin. Now, I recently got this plugin, and it is brilliant. So this plugin is called Dxo Pure Raw 2. The important thing here is the second version of this supports Fujifilm files. The original version did, I think, all other cameras, but Fujifilm, because they have a different array with their sensors, it wasn't supported. So we're going to set this as is. I should probably note that this software was sent to me by the company, but it's pretty powerful and affordable, and I would recommend it. It's very, very good. So we're just going to use all the top settings pretty much. So deep prime, create a DNG file, and save it in a folder next to where the original file is saved. And what this does is it grabs a profile of the camera and the lens, and it will demosaic it in its own algorithm separate to how Lightroom processes Fujifilm files. Now, one of the benefits of that is it takes, as you can see, it's gone from 40 seconds to 20 seconds. It takes a bit of time to go through, and it denoises the image, it adds sharpening, and also it has the profiles for all of the Fujifilm lenses, and will create a version that will sort of de-squeeze the barrel distortion in the middle and sort of correct things a little bit. So if we look at this file, and you see it's renamed it with Dxo Deep Prime. Let's give this one, let's go for 5-star. It's a 5-star image. You're going to see why. And let's drag that, because it's now put it in a different collection. Let's drag it back into our Tokyo collection. Actually, let's put it, into my print options collection. So we have this one, and we have the original that I was looking at. Now, if you saw there, if I just toggle between those.
Yeah, look at that.
Little bit of change on the distortion.
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit more accurate to how the lens actually works, because they've spent the time, I guess, scientifically doing it for a specific number of cameras and brands. And, there are thousands of cameras and lenses and camera lens options available. you can't expect a software to do everything everywhere. You know, it's a lot. So in this version, the Dxo one, we also have a cleaned up image in terms of noise and sharpness and other things. So this, we're looking at the Dxo one, and we are at 200%. And if we go to the original one, let's actually jump in at...
I think you need to zoom in a bit more, because on stream, of course, the resolution is limited.
Yeah. So let's go 400%. And let's see if we can tell the difference.
Yeah, there's definitely some noise difference.
So this is the clean version. This is the noisy version.
Definitely.
And it's just kind of better. It's not super clean, like it's not, you know, squeaky, scrubby, soapy clean. It's still got that character of Fujifilm in terms of like the tones and other things. But it's just cleaner, and it's great for print. It's really great because it means that when you scale things up, you're not going to be scaling up and amplifying all of those artifacts and other things. It just does a good job, and I'm pretty happy with it. Admittedly, and I think I've said this maybe 3 times now, print is quite forgiving. So even if you do have issues in your print, you know, such as like a bad job of contrast somewhere or sharpening in other places, the paper itself and the fibers of the paper are very forgiving. So you can get away with stuff. But when you go larger, of course, that's always just going to multiply and amplify the problems. So this is going to be our starting point. Just make sure that I'm using the correct version. And I'm going to create a virtual copy, as I always do. The reason I do that is so that I can always just go back to the original easily, because as much as you can press the / key to take you to the original, if you duplicate a virtual copy and then duplicate a virtual copy again, the original is always going to be from where it was copied. And so you may actually be copying over old edits rather than the actual original file. Likewise, it's just clean in terms of when browsing through your library. And if I choose the ones that I want to export, I just change my my attribute up here to only my virtual copies, and therefore I can see them if I clear all the other keywords. Therefore I see just my virtual copies, and I can choose to export those. It's just a workflow I've had for years that works for me.
Neat.
So
like it.
Let's go back to this, make sure that is the right one, and let's edit. So first things first, I want to straighten out my perspective, so let's give a try on auto. So I'm just looking here at the edge lines of this building, and just seeing kind of how straight they are. It's done a pretty good job. In fact, it's done a very good job. It's looking, yeah, very, very straight, very happy with that. So I don't think I'm going to interfere any further with that. I should point out that the Pure Raw plugin I did removes all sharpening and noise reduction in Lightroom, and there's no need to touch it here. So I'm actually just going to leave that blank. So we can go straight to the top. And the first thing I notice is the white balance is kind of off, which is bizarre because even though the numerical number looks to be like daylight, I can tell this image needs to be warmed up. And I'm not quite sure how far I want to warm it up, but I'm going to go around 7,000 or so.
So you're just adjusting this by eye, not going like numerically by using the eyedropper or anything?
Yeah. If I did the eyedropper, and we can go for a neutral color like this, you can see that's thrown it all the way to 8,100. Yeah. But I'm going to keep it just a little bit cool because I've got an idea for where I can add that warmth a little bit later. It's just something that I do a lot in my edits.
And of course, we also don't know if the building was actually perfectly great. Could have had like a slight blue tint.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to adjust the exposure, and I'm actually going to bring it down because you notice how immediately we start to see this sunset.
Perfect. Print it now. Your black ink will be empty by half of it.
Yeah.
Printed.
So we're going to drop the contrast back just a little bit. And for the moment, all I'm really focusing on is this sky. because I like the detailing, I like the highlights that we've got happening around here. And I'm just focusing on the sky. And I'm going to bring up some of the shadows, but I'm not going to bring up too much because I do like that dark richness. So in the road down here, we've got, you know, very clean sort of tarmac, and again, very signature for Japan. And we've not even spoken about the image actually. This was taken in Ginza in Tokyo, and I was waiting at this vantage point for a Shinkansen, the bullet train, to come through, and when it came through, and you could see over to the through the buildings on both sides, to the right and to the left, I saw there was another train coming, which is the Yamanote line, which is the most famous subway line, well, metro line in Tokyo. And so the two combined, the most iconic bullet train and metro train, timing was just perfect. And what's funny is a lot of people, when they see this image, don't even notice this second train down here. It kind of blends in.
Didn't even notice that until you pointed it out.
Admittedly, I didn't even notice it when I looked back at the image. And it had been a few years since I'd seen it. And then I remembered back. I was like, I remember seeing through the building and just being so ecstatic that the two trains were coming and that they were these two trains. And of course, the road being empty at the same time, like everything, just timing-wise, I couldn't be happier with this image. It just kind of all came together. So yeah. So we're adjusting the shadows up a bit. I'm also going to just raise the white point, and what that does is it just adds a bit of crispness in places. But most of what we're doing is actually going to come from the tone curve in a moment. So I'm just going to sort of bring that black, and I'm just sort of dabbling back and forward. And now I can just see the original and the edit as we're going. Cool. So that's all looking pretty great. Let's just add a little bit of clarity, just because there is some crispness that we need to draw out of these buildings. And now
we're also using global adjustments, no local edits right now.
Yes, all of this is global, and we're just playing with the overall, because in a moment what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this central area. So I'm looking as if I've got something in front of me where I'm just not really paying attention to that middle area for now. I'm sort of paying attention around the edges, because that's where the eye sort of like draws you in. So I'm sort of raising bits of the midpoint in the shadows, keeping control of the highlights, and just sort of, you know, tweaking it. It's amazing how such small adjustments in curves have a quite dramatic effect at times. So
that's why you need to be extra careful with those edits.
Yeah, I think it was Tony who pointed out to me. So the if I zoom in here, hopefully that works.
We won't see that zoom, but yeah.
No. Oh
no.
I zoomed in on the wrong bit then. So this box here, I believe, was originally designed as a 256 by 256 grid, which meant that 1 pixel change either way was a difference in luminance on an 8-bit 255 brightness per channel per pixel. So then you have 1 pixel to adjust and move your things. As displays have gotten higher resolution, that just becomes a little bit trickier. So I think there's now some like half movements in there, but either way, that's why this is so finicky at times, is because it kind of is a scaled perspective on color and tone.
I mean, you can always increase the zoom level on your entire operating system to make everything a bit larger. If you rather not spend your time on a grid that's also the same size as your thumbnail. So
yeah, definitely. I find myself usually using my screen at about 1.25 magnification.
And look who's joined us in the chat. It's Charles Carter.
Oh, hello, Charles. Had a great stream yesterday.
Yes, indeed. If you have missed that one, if you just joined us today, yesterday, that was a great stream. And you did some animation together, or rather Charles did some photo collages and animation with some of his images.
All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm just gonna play around with the saturation on the warm areas of an image, and I'm just gonna increase those a little bit and kind of play with those, and we can toggle this on and off. So it's ever so subtle, and I'm not even sure this is going to come across in the stream, but I'm just affecting this sky, really. And now if we also do the blue areas, so if I really ramp it up, you'll see that this building is it's got a lot of blue in it, and I actually don't want that. I prefer to have this have a little bit more of like a black and white look to it at times, with sort of color happening. If that makes sense, it's kind of like just a tiny bit. But also, when we come into the luminance, the blues is where we control kind of this crispness and the sort of real velvety aspect of the road. So if we drag this down, it removes some of that crispness, but keeps it soft and dark and velvety. If we increase it, makes it crisp, but also makes it a bit crunchy.
I think this is the first time someone described a road as velvety.
Yeah, velvet road, yeah. And we don't want any of that crispy biscuit crunchy road. None of that.
Crunchy road, take me home.
Yeah. Yeah, we can have a little bit of it, I suppose, but not too much. Anyway, before I go any further, I'm now going to go and do my adjustments in the middle. So I'm starting to lose too much control around the outside. I've done sort of most of what I need to do, I guess. So what I'm going to do now is a bit of a radial center, and you can adjust this afterwards. Always name your masks. And let's just bring up just a little bit of the exposure. Let's maybe make this a bit bigger. And going to warm it up. So this is where we increase the warmth and increase a bit of the contrast on things and raise some of the shadows. And now it's just starting to pull out some of that depth in the image. And the white of the train, just increase that, bring down some of the blacks. Tiny bit of clarity. And yeah, so this is having some nice effect. And the thing that I'm kind of cautious of is I don't want it to spill out too much on this building. But at the same time, I do kind of like that this building was naturally catching some light. Like you can sort of see that the light is coming in sideways here. It's sort of hitting glinting corners of these buildings. So it is truly within nature that light would be coming this direction. So I don't mind it spilling too much. But I'm just going to have it spill just a little bit.
Because you also need to be careful not to just brighten up everything, because yes, of course, bright things do always look better. Just like with music, loud music always sounds better. So I suppose you need to be quite careful not to just brighten up everything and it's like, yeah, that's great. Everything is nice and contrasty, love it, but also very flat.
That is a great analogy, actually. It's kind of funny, isn't it, with music, where there was just a period of time when everything just got louder and pop got
still
louder.
Is. When, for example, when Tony and I do the film clubs, and I often create like a spoof version of the whatever show or film we're working on, and I create the soundtrack, I always, of course, have to do some mixing, and when I ever edit that, I also have to adjust some filters, and it's just when I make it louder, it's like, ooh, that sounds better. Then I just have to stop myself and think, does it really sound better, or did I just make it louder? And I just made it louder. And the same thing applies probably here. Does it really look better, or did I just increase the clarity?
Yeah. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do another radial gradient here, and what I'm going to do linear gradient.
Okay.
Good spot.
It's like, huh? This is awfully linear.
So I'm going to drag this down.
Yes.
And then I'm going to intersect it with the inverse of the sky. And you'll see why in a second. So you see that I'm affecting, because it's a gradient, if I hover over it, it's affecting more towards the top than it is towards the bottom. Yeah. But you'll also see that it's affecting the building slightly.
Right.
So let's go sky. Yeah, let's call it sky. And now if we subtract and select the sky. Okay, so this is now subtracting the sky, which means that our overall mask is now only affecting the buildings. But if we invert our sky, and we can call this one inverted sky, now our gradient is affecting as a gradient, but only the sky.
That's very clever.
Move this so that we only affect just the top half of that sky bit. So it's kind of like using both tools to your advantage.
Right. Because we don't have something like select buildings. It's like,
yeah.
So we need to subtract the sky, but we can subtract the inverse of the sky, which of course are everything that's not the sky. And then we get this very interesting mask. All right.
It's almost like you want to just sit down and just talk to it and say, can I have that bit? Not that bit. A little bit of that bit. And you sort of need to think a little bit programmatically about it. It's can be just as stressful as printing at times.
Or I suppose you could have also just selected this guy and subtracted a gradient from it. Maybe that's less convoluted.
Yep. Yeah, you could subtract a gradient from the other direction. Yep.
Whatever works. Whatever you can unwrap in your head better. And we actually have some comments. Sandrine is saying what it does. Hang on. What it is? Was it? Huh? I need to untangle that sentence for a moment. Oh, okay. Right, okay. It's just a typo. It's like, huh? Is it a question? No. All right. What it does is also that it evens up the bright shop sign underneath the train. There was too much contrast before the rest was brightened. Yes. Okay.
Yes, very true.
I finally get it. Sorry, Sandrine. It took me a second there.
So I'm actually gonna come back to that bit because this was something that I noticed when I originally revisited this image, and I was like, can we read what the shop sign says? Is there enough data? And there is.
Can we?
So we can have a look at that. Cool. So I've just adjusted the sky, and what I've done is I've now cooled down the sky. So this is kind of like a bit of a signature across a lot of my images, actually, is I often take pictures at sunset away from the sun. So I learned the term from one of my viewers because I questioned it in a video once. I was like, what do we call that mirror sunset, that sort of reflective sunset? And the term is alpenglow. Huh, not quite.
Sorry, say again.
So it's alpenglow.
Alpenglow, okay.
Which sounds like a brand of cereal. But it's, so it's, I think the name derives from, if you imagine like in the Alps, for example, like famous pictures of the Matterhorn, and where the sun is rising and it's just catching like the peak of the Matterhorn and the mountain. And so you've got that glow on that side. However, the sun is all the way on the opposite side of the scene. So yeah, alpenglow is the term. And that's where you get this like pink, soft sky, and I love it. I don't intentionally shoot at this time all the time, but I find myself enjoying my images from this time so frequently that it then became a thing. It's like, okay, maybe I should plan my trips and my journeys around this sort of time. May not suit everyone, but I love it. So with that, I've changed the temperature of the sky to a bit more of a blue, so it sort of like cools it down a little bit, and it accentuates the bits that are warm, so kind of like the pinky areas. If I went the opposite way, so if I warmed it up, you see it kind of muddies it. It looks a bit wrong. So I like to reintroduce some of that coolness to the area, like this. And yeah, because we've got this gradient that's happening, if I brought it all the way down, you see how immediately that overburns this bottom area. So we don't want that. So that's too burnt, and that's just kind of softens it so that we're only affecting that top part of the sky.
Yeah, just so you're not killing off any extra highlights that otherwise then would just result as pure white, which you don't want.
Okay. Right. Let's now have a look into this area. So if we go to the original, so we do have extra data. We can see some of the wording. It is a white sign, so it's got a bright white highlight, but we've lost some of that here. So now we need to do another one, and I'm going to do a brush.
Now that's serious dedication right there. Look at the size of that brush compared to the size of the image. And that's why editing can take more time than expected.
So I've got the auto mask feature on, which should help because this is a very straight line and it's a white to black contrast. Nice. So it should kind of discover these edges quite nicely for me. The flow of the brush is quite high, so it's kind of painting it in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring back the detail, so bring back the highlight. But I need to be careful I don't, overdo it like this.
Perfect.
And even just something like this is potentially a bit too overdone, really. So I'm going to experiment actually, and let's call this one shop sign. So we have our brush, but I'm also going to add, this isn't going to work actually, or is it? I'm going to add a radial gradient that does, no, that brings in way too much because it's got the whole thing combined. Let's do another one, radial gradient, and this one we're going to call this one, oh, why can't I name it yet? Because I haven't created it, that's fine. We're going to name this one shop forecourt. I think that would be the right term. And this one, we're just going to darken ever so slightly some of the highlights in the surrounding area so it doesn't draw attention that I've only attached some sort of edit to the sign. And
gotcha. All right.
Kind of minimal, but enough, I think.
Nice. And Charles Carter in the chat says, I remember back in the day when clarity to 100 was all the rage on Instagram. Glad those days are behind us.
Yeah.
Do you also remember
crunchy images?
Those quote-unquote HDR images where everything was super saturated? And apparently that was the new trend.
I never really enjoyed HDR when it was kind of spoken about as layering up multiple images in Photoshop, and then the HDR mode came along, which made it accessible to more people, and then more people were ruining images with it. However, some might argue that this is potentially HDR, even though it's from a single image, because I'm pushing and pulling shadow and highlight details. And I sort of lean into that a little bit on my style, so could potentially sound a little bit hypocritical saying I really disliked HDR, but at times I'm pulling out the dynamic range of this.
Well, I would say the look I was more talking about was definitely very different from the one you have right here. So it's the good version of HDR, if you want to say it like that.
I think one of the things that really stood out was the over sharpening of things and like the sort of halo effect you saw around everything, like the edges. It was a bit too much. Okay, now that I've done my local adjustments, I'm going to go back to doing some global adjustments. And first of all, I just want to bring in a little bit of coolness into the shadow. So I can play around with this. I mean, I could go any sort of direction, but I think I like bringing in some of the coolness. Not too much.
Charles confirms you're fine with this edit. Thanks, Charles.
Seal of approval. And we can do a classic teal and orange look to things.
Hey.
But let's not do too much.
Yeah, we're not trying to create a movie poster here.
Yeah. In my eyes, teal and orange should only ever be used in golden hour images, which of course this image is. It was at sunset. Because otherwise you end up adding warmth where there wasn't warmth, and that looks a bit odd at times. So,
Well, unless you're going for that 2013 Instagram profile picture look. In that case, by all means. And
warm it up.
Oliver also says, HDR done well works. The problem was it wasn't done well.
Very true, yeah. Okay, so I can skip past the detail, lens corrections, and already done the transform. Do I want to add a bit of grain? I could add back just a tiny bit of grain.
The poor plugin did all the work to take out the grain and noise, and now you're just adding it back in.
It's now this is a thing actually in movie posters. Did a lot of this in my design days. You would bring in grain libraries and you'd add them over big images, because what the grain does is it just adds a bit more texture to things, so that when they are blown up large, it doesn't look too clinical, and it adds that sort of sharpness from a bit of distance.
And in fairness, not all grain is created equal. There is, like, you probably don't want color noise from like a more cheap camera. That doesn't look great. But some luminance noise, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You can also fake some texture where there isn't any. And possibly, if you're doing any design work with gradients, especially dark ones, you can sometimes get into color banding, and a bit of grain can, under some circumstances, help with that.
Yeah.
To mask it a bit.
Yes. It's a tricky one. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to come into calibration, and I don't always play with this, so I kind of mess around and see if it's something I want to work with, and I either keep it or don't. So again, just going to play a little bit with shadows and stuff. So as I did with my color grading, where I added some blues into the shadows and sort of like the darker, richer, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of magenta into the shadows, just a little bit. And because I was going for that sort of like warmer highlights and cooler shadows, I can just adjust my red and my blues. So I do this top to bottom, top then bottom. So I go with the reds, and if we do it to the extreme, so let's pull it this far, which we don't like, and then counteract it with the blues. You see how that kind of rebalances when you go one way with one and then the other way with another. So find
interesting
balancing point, and then the green is sort of like the mediator. It sort of sorts out the argument between the reds and the blues. So you go one way, balances it, the other way throws it off. So we go with the way that balances it. And in some ways this could just counteract itself, but what you find is where you're tweaking things, you get just like little numbers off. You start to pull out just a little bit of detail to stuff, and you only really see that when you take it to the extreme, because then that balancing factor, instead of, if you could imagine having your sliders set to like 3 on here and -2 on there, instead of only working with 0.3 and 0.2, you could end up working with, say, differences of like 10 or 20. It just gives you a bit more finer control.
Yeah.
That made sense in my head. I realized when I said that maybe that didn't, but
oh no, definitely.
Hopefully that
since it's hopefully balancing out each other, then you have just more resolution to work with.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things with doing calibration is this is kind of specific to how the file is read, or how it's been read from Lightroom. So this calibration setting would look different on images from a different manufacturer, or sometimes even a different camera if they've changed their sort of sensor color science a little bit. But generally, most cameras do try to achieve the same perfect red, greens, and blues with their own little twist on things. Calibration, I find, is a way of rather than changing, how can I explain this? Rather than changing the output that's come out from Lightroom, you're sort of tweaking what the input is.
All right.
Which is odd that it's at the bottom of the chain, but that's my understanding of it anyway. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that.
And I think that sort of also clears up the question Sandrine has, who was asking, what is the advantage of tweaking it in calibration as opposed to color correction? I think we just, hopefully gave that answer.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how it is. I mean, that's from my experience of using it all the time. That's sort of how it's come about. Unless I just happen to have had repeatable experience, I'm not sure. Anyway, if we toggle this on and off, you'll see that it's had like a bit of an overall sort of shimmer on things. And again, this may not be coming through on stream, but if we pay attention to this area, I'll zoom in. It's just kind of highlighting that warmth a little bit, but it's not doing it in the way that if we just warmed up the image. You know, it's not like it's going overall on things. It's doing it in harmony and in balance with how the raw file sits. So yeah, that's kind of how it all comes together. So in terms of the image, I think I'm pretty happy with this. Maybe just got a couple of extra things I could try. Let's try a linear gradient on the edges. Now this may not work. It may overdo it, but let's try.
And sometimes you also can use the calibration panel, just going back to that for 1 second, in the Photoshop version of Camera Raw, where you can add it as a filter. In that case, of course, you don't really have access to the original profile of the camera, since most likely your image will be flattened already. But it can still add really nice twists to your colors if you play with the filter like that. I've seen someone, Brady from Texture Labs, of course, he did a movie poster, and apparently with the primaries you can enhance the skin tones and take a bit of yellowness out of that. So the calibration not only useful in Lightroom but also in Photoshop when you're playing around with that.
Yeah, it's a fun one to play with. It's a bit like cross-processing at times. You know, in the olden days of processing your slide film in, or rather your 35mm in slide sort of liquids and whatever. I used to really enjoy that look of things. Not so much anymore. There was a time and a place. I think I actually just saw a comment down here.
Yeah, I also saw that. I was like thinking, huh? What are you talking about? But then I saw the ad on the side.
Yeah, so this is kind of a funny inside joke. Probably by frequency on my channel, a word that stands out all the time is premium. I say premium so much, I don't quite know where it came about, but I just recognized in myself a few years back. I was like, you know what? One of the things that I really just love about like certain products and just other things is premium quality. Like I love researching things and just finding the highest and best quality achievable. And I'll happily wait until I can either afford something or, you know, until the right thing comes around. And so after this scene happened, and to be honest, I wasn't paying attention to the advert. I was paying attention mainly to the trains and the timing and trying to get the building as straight as possible. Although we saw that the original image wasn't that straight. I didn't realize until afterwards that I'd, you know, captured the word premium on this advert, and I just think it's brilliant. But what's funny anyway is this guy, I believe, is a baseball player, very famous in Japan. Showed it to Ellie's mum, and that was the first thing she noticed. She was like, "That guy." And yeah, the comment just being made that celebrities will no longer be used in beer advertising.
Beer?
I think this is actually an energy supplement.
It would be an awfully small bottle for beer.
Yeah, or giant hands. You never know.
I mean, he's on the side of a billboard, so there you go.
Yeah, very
Maybe
true.
it's life
Life
size.
size. In which case, then it's a very big beer. So yeah, I just love the fact that this this photo, which to me symbolizes so much of urban Japan, also just has the word premium in it, which I think is another symbol of Japan. Okay, so what I've just done is I created a few radial gradients. So one on the right, one on the left, one below, and subtracting the sky. And what we're doing here is just this sort of U-shape bottom area, and just darkening it ever so slightly, just sort of bringing some of the darkness which continues to draw into the center. I'm not sure if I need to do it, but I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to reduce so it's not removing too much detail from the people. And now that I'm looking at this in its entirety, going back to the white balance and noticing it's got just a hint too much of magenta. So it's going to drop that back. Oh, actually back to the original. There we go. Plus 14. Cool. So this is a, you know, very detailed sort of processing of the image, and what I'm kind of looking for now that I'm thinking about print is all the certain details that will either get, you know, lost in the image or things that might get muddied out. So what I do now is I zoom in and I just kind of like inspect around and just see different areas. So I can see that potentially we might lose a bit of detail in here and some of the darker areas. So let's reduce, maybe I don't need this bottom one, you know, and kind of have to get to a point where you think, you know, where am I happy and okay with losing detail, and where do I absolutely need to keep that detail? That's someone with their feet up. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm overall pretty happy with the what's going on here?
Yes, power zoom.
Just brain not working there, kept clicking, and all I need to do is click once. So I'm pretty happy with how the detail is looking here. Now what we need to do is see how this is going to look in print. And this is where the traditional headache starts, and where we can hopefully alleviate that. So, soft proofing. This is your term for how you see how an image is going to look in print. You see that by toggling this on and off, we're seeing a slight difference in the colors. So, again, hopefully you can see that, but when turning soft proofing on, we can see that it's going a little bit cooler. Shadows a little bit flatter, less sort of like punch to them. But overall, this is actually having a very accurate effect. Because what it's doing is when we turn on soft proofing, is up the top we are using a print profile. This is where if you're going to go with a professional printers, contact your printers and say, do you have profiles that I can use in my editing software? If they say yes, they should hand them over to you completely fine. If they say no, you may want to reassess how professional they are as a printer. You should be able to get print profiles for your printers. It makes their job so much easier because effectively what they've got, and so I've got a bunch of profiles here on different types of paper. What they have is their calibration for their printer to their paper knowing how much ink is needed to saturate things, knowing all sorts of levels of where the colors sit and how the paper will interact with it, because sometimes paper can be white, sometimes it can be more of a cotton, or like a cotton color, sometimes maybe more of like a warmer color and other things. So what you see on screen is not what you see in print. And this, I think, is where a lot of the headaches come from. If you're printing at home, you can get some sort of default print profiles from some manufacturers, usually from the paper manufacturers with some popular printers. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, you're going to have to make your own profiles. And that's something that I personally haven't gone into because I've had enough stress and headache with printers as it is. So I think I would avoid, but if you want to take on the challenge, then yeah, you can create your own profile.
So perhaps you can clarify, what does the profile do? Does it simulate how it will look when it's printed, or does it sort of balance out the imperfections of the printing process? What's like the idea?
It does its best job, and I just realized I didn't have simulate paper and ink, so I've just turned that on. It does its best job of simulating how this image is going to look based on your screen color profile calibration, which it will know from, in this case on the Mac, from system preferences, and it will match it to what the printer calibration is, and it will do its best of converting between RGB and CMYK, which is a whole thing that we've not explained yet, but we can go into a little bit of detail on, and potentially with some visual aids if I have. No, maybe I wouldn't have time for that. So a screen, a digital device that you're looking at on your images, is built up of red, green, and blue pixels. Throughout your whole image, every pixel has red, green, and blue photosites, I believe is the term. And what they do is they illuminate between a value of nothing to its full brightness. Now, depending on the brightness of your screen, depends on the value of that. When you come into print, so on RGB, if those red, green, and blue pixels are at their full brightness, then the image is white, because full brightness across all the color spectrum is white. If all of those are at 0, then the image is black. So your photo on a digital display is made up of all sorts of varying levels of brightness in pixels that generate an illuminated screen for you to look at with color. When it goes onto paper, the opposite is true. So no longer are we using RGB, we're actually using CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, using a K because they don't want to use B, because B could be seen as blue, I believe. I'm not sure on the history of that.
K is
CMYK.
The key.
Key color, that's the one. Yes. And the inverse is true for print. So the more ink that we add, the darker it gets. So on digital, the more brightness we add, the whiter it gets. In print, the more ink we add, the darker it gets. And if you combine all of the C, M, Y, and K, we get as close to black as possible. They come in at different angles and whatever, but we don't need to go into those details. And yeah, so the difference between a screen and a printer is always going to exist. It's always going to be there. You're never going to be able to see the perfect representation because your screen displays color and light in a completely different manner to how it does in print. That being said, these profiles will do their absolute best to simulate how they work. So you see that if I turn on soft proofing and turn off, we can see that we've got some slight color shift happening and a little bit of softness, because when we print onto particular paper types, we have different levels of contrast. I actually have some paper types here, so hopefully I can just show you a few different options that really simulate. So let's go for...
And we're talking about RGB. We, of course, pretend to ignore the brief moment in time where some TV manufacturers thought it would be a great idea to add yellow in the subpixels. Just gonna pretend that never happened.
Yeah. So, hopefully you'll be able to see this. Yes. I'm going to hold this at the focal plane. So the paper that I've decided that I enjoy the most is from Han Mul, and it's Photo Rag. It is a very, very matte paper. It's got a beautiful texture to it. It's, yeah, just, it feels like illustration paper or like watercolor paper. But the contrast and the depth you get from the images is amazing. I've never seen paper handle ink like this. But you can get different variants of other ones.
Say that
So
name
see
again.
that immediately. So it's Han Mul.
Hanemühle.
Hanemühle.
Hanemühle. It's a German company. Just briefly thought, like, is it that one? Yeah, it is. All right. Interesting. All right.
Photo Rag, and it's 308 GSM. Absolutely beautiful paper. If you ever get your hands on it, yeah,
it is.
It's so good. But if we compare to a different one, so this one immediately, you see that it's got reflective, it's shiny. This one is actually very shiny. This is a metallic paper. So this is a Kodak metallic, which could suit some images. But when it comes to choosing your paper, sometimes I can be very, I say sometimes, I'm always very picky on things. And one thing that I really don't like about a lot of these other papers is the backs of them are all branded. So this just says Kodak, Kodak, Kodak everywhere. And even though this comes from a professional printer, it doesn't look professional to me when the paper says like Kodak or Epson or Fujifilm or something on the back of it. And not only that, but this is a thinner paper. It just doesn't have a nice weight to it. And likewise, here's another one. This is incredibly glossy. You can barely even see the image on here. Contrast is great on it, but it is glossy and just too glossy for my liking. I love a matte image. But again, just says Fujifilm all over the back, and it's just not to my taste and standard. Whereas the Hanemühle, beautifully matte. I can show it in any sort of light. The image still looks the same. Completely blank on the back, and it's just thicker. It's very, very thick, and I love it.
Very premium.
It is. It's a premium paper for sure. So to simulate that, now if we go back into Lightroom, we can see that I'm using the Hanemühle Photo Rag profile, but we can also see some different ones. So we got Canson Barita or Barita. I think it's Barita. Or Barita is a very sort of like vivid image, and you can see the difference between these.
Wow.
So from your desktop, you can kind of get an idea of where your print's going to go, and this is just immensely helpful.
I think I could just spend an entire afternoon just scrolling through all those profiles and see like, ooh, I like this one. Oh no, I don't like that one.
Yep. And we can go through, even different printing methods. Again, don't want to go too in depth on this, but this is a C-type image, whereas the ones on Hanemühle and others are Giclée. C-type is effectively where they create kind of like a negative of an image, and then they project it via light. When I first heard about this, I felt like that was going to be the best and highest quality that I would like for my images, but it turns out I didn't really like the parameters involved, because you're doing it optically, you have things like sharpness and other things you can adjust with the printer, and it's just a bit too much control that's been lost. And as a control freak, I don't necessarily like that. And also they go on to generally more glossier types of paper, whereas the matte paper, perfect for inkjet, and Giclée is, again, hopefully I'm not butchering that pronunciation, it's come along a long way. So when I was back at college, it kind of was spoken about with a little bit of a frown at times from some of my lecturers, but in those 20 years or so, it's come along a long way, and I think is brilliant quality. So that's maybe enough on profiles. Hopefully that gives the
yes, definitely
gives the idea.
very interesting, very exciting. And now they're talking about Germans and German lessons on Adobe Live when we do have German streams. So if you are interested, well, there you go. 2 years of content.
Cool. So I have my print here,
Yes.
and whilst I'm in soft proofing, I can't do any edits unless I create a proof copy. So you see that as I start doing things, it says, "Whoa, are you sure you want to do that?" So I actually don't necessarily want to make a proof copy. So if I go back, turn this off, I can just make some toggles, and you see that when I actually had soft proofing on, kind of cooled down the image just a little bit, and it lost a little bit of contrast. So I'm just going to warm it up ever so slightly, and it's going to bring back just a tiny bit of contrast. So on digital, it's now, it's getting into the realm of looking a little bit overdone. But when it comes into print, I can assure you it is comfortable to look at. It's not too crunchy, too contrasty, and it will look good. Okay, so we've got our print all good, all happy. Now comes the next headache with printing. What size do you print your image at, and what ratio do you use? There are so many different print sizes and print ratios that exist, and there's, let's go create a new without giving it away. How do I do this without giving it away? Let's just go A4. So there are so many different document sizes, so many different artistic sizes, different ratios, and you may be drawn to thinking when you're going to print your photos, you're like, cool, I'll just print it A4, I'll do one A3, and maybe I'll do one A2. And you'll use the set paper sizes and the set aspect ratios of that. But personally, I don't think photography lends itself in printed form on paper that's designed for documents, such as A sizes. I prefer to use a more traditional scale of things. So if we go into our crop, we have things like a 4:3 crop, which, oops, I'm still on soft proofing. Let's get out of this. So I personally like to use things like a 4:3 crop, which you see takes off some of the top and bottom because this sensor is a 3:2. But you may like to use a 4:5, which is even more closer to a square. Or maybe you want to go for a 2:1 and have a really narrow print of things. Or do we have the original, which is 3:2? Maybe you want to go for that. So when you start printing and presenting your work, there are all these factors to consider, and then there's factors of the paper that's available, and then there's the factors of how many frames exist in your paper size, and then there is the biggest issue, which is, do you go metric or do you go imperial? Because a lot of frames are still made in inches, even though most of the world uses centimeters and millimeters now. So again, this was a bigger headache than it needed to be, and spent a lot of time researching, going around like various online stores and home decoration stores that sell prints, that sell frames, places like IKEA, where I'd imagine most people get their frames, and just seeing what exists. And throughout all my research, I can tell you that it's a mess. it's a complete mess. So to simplify this, I'm going to jump into Illustrator and let me just show you how this looks. So we have, let's just move my artboard so we've got some space. So this is an A4 document, which I believe should be used for documents, not for artwork. And we have a few others that exist. So a 3:4 that is common for this size would be 300 millimeters by 400 millimeters. So you quite often see them in frames 30 by 40, which I believe is close to a 12 by 9 in inches. Close to, but not exact. 12 by 9, I believe, is actually 406 millimeters. We can do that again. So if we go 9 inches by 12 inches. Oh, maybe it's not 16 by. Sorry, so 16 by 12. So if we do 12 inches across, 16 inches. Yeah, so 304.8 by 406. And if we line those up, let's make this one blue. Let's make this one, let's go for a pink. Put this on top. So if we line those up, you'll see there is a discrepancy between metric and imperial. So when it comes to choosing your print sizes and choosing your frame sizes, this little gap here can actually be a major problem for people. It's an issue of, do you buy a frame off the shelf or do you buy a custom frame? And these are considerations you have to make when selling your prints, and likewise you have to understand where your audience is. Thankfully, I've searched in America and there are a lot of metric frames, so I've decided that metric is the way that I am going, which I'm happy about. So, sizing that I have come to with my printing, let's just bring this back to, nice blue. So sizing that I've come to are a 30 by 40, which I'm deeming as like a standard. That's 30 by 40 centimeters, by the way. And if we scale this up, the next appropriate, I believe, is a 45 by 600. And then if we scale down, what would our scale down be? Scaling down is actually trickier because they do come closer to A4 sizing. So from research that I found, it's 21 by 30. Oh, 300.
Okay.
Which is only 3 millimeters off of A4. So it's, yeah, just a little bit larger. But these can be a good sort of starting point for your images in terms of your print size. I'm actually changing my my larger one. I'm going super size, and I'm using a different aspect ratio. So this, for my larger prints that I'm working with, are in the 5x7 format.
Interesting.
Okay. So far, this all seems kind of normal, right? But
yeah.
when it comes to printing, and I have some prints here. Go back to the large one. Oh, let me pull this out.
Also, Angus saying custom frames will often cost more than the print itself. Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely a consideration to have. So when it comes to printing, I like to have a bit of a margin around the paper. It gives you a way to handle the print without damaging it too much, although you could wear some lovely Mickey Mouse gloves if you like. But yeah, having a bit of a margin around a print also gives you an area where you can sign your print, and mainly it just allows you to see the intended crop of the image, because you're clearly defining where the edge of that image is, rather than feeling like it was the paper that decided what the crop was. So adding your margins to your image. But when you start to do that, and if you do this as, say, I think this is a 15 mil, or it might be a 20 mil margin, when you scale that up, that changes your aspect ratio of the image in between, because if your margin stays the same, the image inside is adjusting its aspect ratio ever so slightly. And so when you send to the print, you want to make sure that you're sending your exact crop. You don't want to be sending the same file that then gets cropped by the printers, or the paper expands and other stuff. So you have to do a little bit of maths and working out on things. So thankfully,
okay,
I have gone through a whole lot of research, and I've created all these different variants of saying, right, what is the paper size that we want to do? Do we want to do metric, imperial? Do we want to go for a margin of a set value, or do we want to do a margin of a percentage? And I discovered that doing margins of a percentage is a far easier approach to things, because as the print gets larger, so does the margin, and it just overall feels comfortable. And I found that these three sizes, which are the what was this one? The 30 by 21, 40 by 30, and the 45 by 60. When scaled up, so if we scale up our 30 by 40, you see it matches perfectly because our margins are set as a percentage. So therefore, we can send that same image, which would be this gray area, we can send that to the printer and it'll be fine. If we did something that wasn't, so let's say these two, and if we scale up this, so these have the same margins, and if we scale it up, you'll notice that, oh, it ends up slightly wrong. And the edges, I think that was actually a scaled, the edges don't quite line up correctly, and it becomes a real headache. You see that? That's now, doesn't work over here. So I'm only really saying this as kind of like a big warning, because honestly, this has taken days to go through and find the sizing. It's taken multiple prints. It's cost a lot of money going through and finding these and finding the balance, because sometimes the margin's too much, sometimes too little. But these are the joys of printing and going through all the things. So when we come to choosing our print and our export, if I'm doing a 3x4 export, so let's stick with our 30 by 40. Of course, our image isn't actually going to be 30 by 40. Our image, in this case, if I've got a 20mm margin, our image is going to be 26 by 36. So therefore, our crop is a 2.6 by 3.6, because that is this area. Forgive me if I've lost anyone by this point. So if we go back to Lightroom, and we have our image that I'm working on, and we go into our crop. So where we were originally going to be doing a 4x3, but we know that when you add the margin, that means that the paper goes larger than the frame, therefore someone's going to have to pay for a custom frame. It's too much hassle. We want to fit the image and the margin within the 40 by 30. So we have to use a custom crop, which is a 2.6 by a 3.6. There it is, ever so slight adjustment. And let's find where we want to make our crop. That's all good. And let's just double check our soft proofing. And let's also just see where our document may struggle. We can see that the screen is potentially struggling with these areas, but the print, if I hover over it, I'm not getting any significant areas where the print's going to struggle other than this red. Just a little guide here. Yeah, so our soft print's good. Let's export, and I've created a preset, but I'm just going to show you what it does. So I'm going to export as a print in a print folder in TIFF format. So TIFF is going to be the highest format that I can send to my printers with no compression, 16 bits of color, all the metadata, all fine, all the sizes. And let's export that as a print. So now we have our print, and if I take that, where we go and find let's create a window. So my export bin from Lightroom, my prints. This was that print that applied to the name of the profile. It looks a little bit dull on this screen right now because it is a TIFF with that print profile applied. And so I can then take that, I can send it to my printers, and I can tell them what the margin is and everything. You can do it that way, or if you want to have complete control over things, you can go into your print from within Lightroom. And this I don't really enjoy using too much, but it can can help you if you want to print directly from Lightroom. So let's just toggle some settings here. And
that's also what Sandrine said. She said, I generally set up the paper format in the print module in Lightroom Classic and then export as a digital file from there.
So here is where you can start to add in your margins and things. But as I said, I don't use this generally too much because I prefer to either send via InDesign or send the image itself and you know, work with the printers to tell them what the margins are, and all they have then is just the image with space for what the margins would be. I'm struggling to even see the print page size actually. Where do I look for that? Interesting. How do I set the paper size?
Well, it's currently set to 16 by 12 inches.
Where are we seeing that?
Oh,
yeah. But where did I set that? So I used one of my presets that I made previously, but I cannot remember. Please, someone in the chat. Page setup, bottom left. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Just Google that.
Yeah. So we can choose different default sizes, or we can go manage sizes. And this is where I can create a new one. So we've got our 16 by 12 inches that I used previously. And we're actually going to do 300 by 400. And this is going to be our 30 by 40. Margins, I think it was 20 mil that I enjoyed. Yep. And let's go. Okay. Okay. There we go. So now we have our page set up, and we have our image, which is currently set to show the whole image, but if we zoom to fill, we can have that, and we can just move it ever so slightly, adjust it. Now, depending on your preference, you may enjoy this, but I personally like to just see where my crop is in Lightroom and know that if I come back to that image at a later date, I can know that that crop that I'm using here is exactly the same crop that I'm going to use when I export out the web version of the image, my Instagram version of the image, and everything. If I'm doing it here, this is creating all just for print. And likewise, it's going to have the borders and the margins and everything. It's just, to me, there are too many variables that could be different.
Right.
Granted, for this image, there's only a slight bit of movement. But if, for example, I was cropping in tight on this image, and then I was bringing that into the print, it's I find it problematic. But that could just be me.
Yeah, and even
but anyway, this is
even just a slight difference can really make a huge impact on the composition. For example, the advertisement on the left, I would say if it was touching the left side of the frame, that would be an issue. So
yep.
Even though that's just like a tiny distance.
Yeah, it's everything has balance and works in various ways. So the method that I would personally use is in InDesign, so that I can repeat and use the same artwork.
We're using all the apps today.
All the apps, yeah. So we have a new version, a new document, sorry. And let's create, 300 millimeters by 400.
And Nitin is saying, do not cut the advertisement. We won't, don't worry. Still there.
Columns 1, that's fine. I'm going to turn off facing pages. And let's create. So I like to preview my images in here. And we can take our print, quite simply drag and drop it in. And then this will be where I adjust those sort of differences in margins for print but at least I know that every time I return to that file, it's going to be the same, and it can be the same across all of my images. And Lightroom, because I'm not adjusting that crop any further, that will be the crop that's used on the online images and other stuff, and I'll batch export multiple images all out together. So we have our image here, and I can also create a new page, and I can set this page to be
or not to be.
Where do I set my page size? This is document size. Oh, Tim, do you know where the page size?
Yes, of course, under File, Document Setup.
That will be the whole document. I want to do just the individual page. If I do alternate layout, is that going to cause a problem? Okay, we may, unless we go back to...
Select one or more page thumbnails in the Pages panel. Click the Edit Page Size button at the bottom of the panel. Choose Custom.
Edit page size, bottom. There we go, edit page size. Thank you. So what I can do here is I can have a document and I can have my individual sizes. So we've got our 30 by 40. Next one can be a custom one. And this one can be our, what was it? 450 by 600. Actually, no, that's going to be the same ratio. So that's, we can do that.
What do you mean, Oliver? Tim's Google skills are on fire today. Just Bing it.
So we can have a second image here. And you'll notice that with the same margins, this was that issue I was talking about before, where our top and our bottom are incorrect, but we can adjust our margins. So I happen to know that on a 45 by 60, scaling our margins to a 25mm should fit perfectly. Is it 25? Maybe it's 30. I've done something wrong here. Okay, we'll wing it from here. So we have our document options here, and let's create another page, and let's set this one to our even bigger 500 by 700, and let's call this one 50, 70. Don't ask me why I set the naming in centimeters and the sizing in millimeters.
Why did you set the naming in centimeters and the sizes in millimeters?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, nobody knows.
Yeah. So this is how we can preview, and we can see how all our documents are looking if we manage the same margins. And you can spend some time just finding out, do you want to use the same margins? Oops. Or do you want to crop them off? That was weird. I'm using the wrong tool. Do you want to crop them off, or do you want to, you know, keep them the same?
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of variables that, admittedly, all come down to your own decision. They're your creative control, and
for better or for worse.
Yeah, various different things to experiment with. But it is, you know, the reason I'm sharing this is because it is food for thought, and it's kind of a big deal to me, because when you come back to printing them, and I've printed various ones, I won't show them, they're too big, you get a different feel when there's a bigger margin, when there's a smaller margin. And so yeah, you can spend your time experimenting and adjusting things. But anyway, once you've got all your print sizes, and you may only be doing one, you can save this as a PDF, export it, send it off to your printers. You could either export 3 individual PDFs if they prefer that. Again, talk with your printers, ask what they need, and they can then have an individual PDF per print, or they may be happy to receive a PDF that has all of your print options available, and they'll know that it's the small one, it's the medium one, it's the large one, you know, everything combined. So we sort of lost our way and direction a little bit at times, but I think it just kind of maybe highlights and explains that this is a very complex, simple situation. Maybe I'm making it more complex than it needs to be, but I think when it comes to print and when it comes to art, these are the details that do matter to people. And when they feel it in their hands and they open that package, that's when it kind of all comes together, and that's when you think, okay, a lot of care and attention has been put into this to make it feel right. Yeah, if we have some time, I just want to share another little thing that I've been working on, which
definitely
goes hand in hand with the prints, and that is, how do we package our prints? So there are two common ways of printing. You can either send stuff in a tube like this. I can't remember the dimensions of this. You roll your print, you pop it in the tube, and that was a good sound. Send it in the post, and off it goes. I really don't like these. I will only ever use a tube if I have to, and that could be down to restrictions on sending things internationally. Maybe, you know, you can't send certain stuff above certain dimensions, and so a bigger print has to go into a tube. But if I can, I will avoid using a tube, because I don't like rolling the print. It feels really uncomfortable, and you've got potential to like tear some of the micro textures. So if possible, I'd rather send in a flat package, sandwich between extra areas of cardboard. Benefit of this is all fully cardboard, so you know, compostable, recyclable. Whereas the tubes they're thicker cardboard, but they've got plastic end caps, which you never really know what to do with at the end of them. Just not a fan of them. Whereas this, once you've got your envelope stiffeners, is a really rigid option. I also think it has the benefit of when someone receives their print and they open it, and that print is flat, they don't have to unroll it and they don't have to awkwardly try and hold it. When they receive that print and it's flat, you can immediately look at the details and the quality, and you can just spend time studying that image. You don't have to wait for it to flatten out. And I think it just makes an overall better experience. And so as part of that experience, I want to brand my packaging. So I've been going through and doing various different tape designs using my Art in the Heart logo. Just kind of going through and finding different values. So of course I mocked up the exact dimensions of my package, which that's another headache, trying to find the right packaging, because if you're in the UK, Royal Mail have set, quite cleverly, they've set their pricing structure so that things that would normally be, say, an A3 document are in the higher tier of pricing, whereas these prints, they're smaller than A3, but most of the packaging that's available is for A3, and so it ends up making the postage at times twice as much, unnecessarily so. So yeah, trying to find some packaging that fits just within the boundaries of Royal Mail's bracketing tiers, but still doesn't damage the print and has enough space for it to have padding and other stuff. That was a long time finding them. And part of that is then adding tape onto it. So I've been creating all sorts of different tape. I want to work with a lot of patterns, because of course this tape is going to be printed on a roll, so it has to be a repeating pattern. And in the end, I settled towards this sort of layout and have gone for this type of tape, which when scaled out will look like this. So if you do happen to get one of my prints one day, hopefully this will be the tape that's on it. And depending on where it sits in the roll, you may have tape that's kind of like this, or like this, But I think it's just a nice feature, so that it, it stands out when it arrives in the mail. Just builds that excitement, because getting prints is exciting, and it's a lot of fun. And also, these are paper tape, water activated, which is very fun to use. You just put water on the back and it sticks with a gum. So they're not using any sort of unnatural adhesive. Yeah, all sorts of things to consider, but you can probably tell I've had a lot of fun and gotten quite nerdy through all of this. But yeah,
3 prints and pints for a year. Yeah.
Prints and pints, what an event! Oh, that's
Also,
been fairly quick.
Sandrine just said you put a paper ring on your print because, like for the tube, because it's a nightmare to take off the tube. Otherwise, been there, it just sticks to the edges.
Oh yeah. So that's the thing. You have to get paper bigger than your print so that your print doesn't like sort of scuff towards the edges. Roll that up, potentially put like a tissue paper around it as well. Tape it all, and then all it's going to do is boom, expand to that roll, and yeah, it's just, honestly, there are so many headaches in printing. It's no wonder when digital really started coming about that the world just sort of looked at things differently, because they didn't have all these headaches sort of boggling their mind. And I speak from experience. I used to design big exhibition graphics on like massive paneling, and I couldn't even work at the scale that I was actually working at. I had to work at a scale down of like a 12:1. So all my measurements were in millimeters, but I had to be thinking in meters.
Yeah.
Yeah, headaches. So hopefully these last 90 minutes, as much as they've been a bit of a ramble in places all over, hopefully it's given you some sort of workflow tips that can help if you're looking to print. If not, maybe it's just given you some time to appreciate those who are printing that you've maybe bought from in the past, and realize the struggles they've gone through.
And now it's time for our minute of relaxation after we have printed everything. Just calm down again. Zen.
Lovely.
And refill that magenta ink. Right. I think that's all. That's essentially all the time we have for today. Unless you have something very quick, I do think we can end the stream here. Yeah?
Yep, all good.
All right.
Very good indeed.
Then, first of all, thank you very much for walking us through this whole process from start to finish. It's like a complete masterclass. Apart from, of course, taking the image, which would have been quite tricky. And also, fill the pint glass. Yes, thanks, Angus. Oliver says, thanks, Joe and Tim. Angus says, thank you both. Thanks, guys. Always a joy. Thank you. Thank you. I was so informative. I have learned a lot. Thank you, Eva, for joining us. Right. This was not the last stream of this week, because we will be back on Friday with the half-hour Adobe Express stream with the one and only Liz Mosley. And we will also be back next week on Monday. I'm just going to check who is joining us on Monday. Drumroll, please. Come on, load. Yes, we do have a papercraft process stream behind the scenes with Owen Gildersleeve. And we're going to have a look at animated icons, which is a 2-part series with Lucy and Tanya, both hosts, one from Germany and one from France streams. And that will, like I said, be a 2-part stream from Tuesday to Wednesday. And, of course, another Express stream next Friday as well, because now they are weekly. But for today, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for watching and chatting and, of course, telling us all about the printing process and editing, Joe. And do you have any last words you want to say before I end the stream?
Check your ink levels. Don't let them expire.
Be nice to your printers, as they said in the chat.
Yeah.
All right. Well then, see you very soon here in see you very soon here on Adobe Live on another stream.
Cheers.
Bye for now.
See ya.